Hey, good morning, all. It's Friday, May 14th, and that's the day we get to talk science. And you might be saying to yourself, well, Doug, why are you wearing a mask? And as Dan mentioned earlier, so that so that in Joe Biden fashion, I can take it off, leave it hanging out. Because, friends, on this day, the country wakes up to the Centers for Disease Control saying, take that old dirty mask of yours and throw it away.
Burn your
if
masks.
you're twice vaccinated. That's right. Finally, all of you people that wanted free from the burden of wearing your mask and wanted the government not to tell you to wear your mask, well, you don't have to. All you have to do is be injected with a vaccine. And you can take your mask off. Look, it's finally happened, and around here we like to tell you about the good news. And there's a little bit of good news that the people who study these things have now come to the conclusion that you are safe for yourself and for others to be out in the wild without a mask on. That you can drop your mask and feel safe if you're twice vaccinated. Not only safe for yourself, but that your what they refer to as a viral load, which is a great phrase. Your viral load is low enough if you're twice vaccinated or once vaccinated, if you got that, that off-brand, Johnson & Johnson vaccine. You're going to be safe for others as well as safe for yourself. So don't worry about it. You're free to get up and move about the cabin, as a metaphor. Quite literally, you're not free to move about the cabin without a mask, because they are still suggesting that you wear a mask on an airplane. All of which can add to a little bit of confusion for people. But we're going to celebrate this day and tell you a little bit of story about how it came about. People have been learning over the last number of months that there was a particular scientist named Kizzy Corbett who was behind us taking off our masks. We're going to hear a bit of the story from her. CBS did a nice little bit. We're going to play a section of that for you so you can hear her and meet her. A black woman, a 34-year-old black woman working for an organization that was connected to the National Institute of Health. And she's the one that we credit when history is told. She's the one. And this is a big deal because we talk about science around here. She does a couple of things really well. She's public. She's very understandable. She breaks the typically white male dominated narratives. Like if you have watched so much of what goes on around Centers for Disease Control, you begin to think it's old white men again who are running this. And that's true. They do tend to be in the positions that are seen on television, but the real genius behind it were all these scientists. And Kizzy Corbett, as she goes, the nickname she goes by, was one of those. So we're going to talk to you about that and chat a little bit about this drop in the mask mandate thing, which really came on fast. Dan, I feel like it was, by the way, I'm Doug Padgett in Minneapolis, Dan in Indiana. Tell us in the chat where you're from if you're watching this live, and if you're listening by podcast, stop your bike or hop off the treadmill, or set your cooking utensils aside and shoot us an email over at podcast@VoteCommonGood and let us know where you're listening from. And if you're yet ready to take your mask off and to not wear it, because I think it's going to create some real consternation for people, because it was just weeks ago that people were saying, wear two masks, double them up. Remember that? Remember the two
double
masks
this movement? Up, yeah.
It was like, no, one mask doesn't get there. You have to wear two. And I felt like, oh my goodness, we are going to be wearing masks for a long time. My wife last night said 3 or 4 times, I really thought we were going to, masks were going to be something recommended by the CDC in an ongoing fashion. And all of a sudden, Thursday afternoon, they're like, done. Drop the mask.
Yeah.
Back to robbing banks if you're going to wear a mask. No other reason to have one on. You imagine the bank robber that goes in and he's got his mask on, and people are looking at him. He's like, "No, I've been vaccinated. I'm here to stick up the joint. Don't judge me for not being vaccinated." Because now, if you're wearing a mask, people are going to think you're an anti-vaxxer. This is going to create all kinds of confusion.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
Yeah. What are they doing in Indiana? Did Indiana have a mask mandate already? Did they already drop the mask mandate?
Mostly, yeah. So certain cities and counties have kept it, but the state as a whole is like, no, you don't need to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, and there's still an awful lot of people that are vulnerable. They haven't gotten the vaccine. They won't get the vaccine, so
Right.
they're still vulnerable. Whole communities that don't yet have it. Um, and it doesn't mean when they say if you've been vaccinated and fully vaccinated, you don't have to wear it, because you are as safe not wearing a mask for passing the infection as you are wearing a mask. Is the point, right? They've tested this enough now to
Mm-hmm.
know that you're not going to pass it on to others, and you are not likely to be stricken with an illness if you were to contract the virus.
And from what I
So
understand, that's what they thought would be the case, but out of precaution, they said, let's keep masks until we can study this enough to know that once you're vaccinated, you won't pass it to others without symptoms.
So that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
So if you're not wearing a mask, you're not making the vulnerable more vulnerable. But this has already started. I've seen people on social media that are already saying, "Hey, no, you need to keep a mask on because not everybody has one yet." And now this whole question about the narrative versus the science, like, well, what is it saying about you versus what is the what is the efficacy of not wearing a mask scientifically. Now
Uh,
the roles are going to switch, where
yeah.
now people who it's going to be a tumultuous number of, I don't know if it'll be days or weeks or months, where people who just days ago again were saying double up on the masks, I think are going to feel a bit like the rug has been pulled out. And now all of a sudden, stores, I'm in Minneapolis and here in Minnesota, the governor said as of Friday, masks are no longer going to be mandated. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but all of our other limitations like social distancing and size in stores as of yesterday was still in place. But because they wanted to be right in line with the CDC, just, at 4 o'clock yesterday, they're like, okay, tomorrow you don't have to wear masks. So if you run a shop or a store, what are you going to do? How are you going to manage this? Not unlike when the masks were first introduced and became a mandate. Here in Minnesota, that was the end of July. I was surprised to read that yesterday. I remembered it coming way back in April or May, but I guess the official statement statewide that there's a statewide mask mandate took a while to put into place.
Hmm.
Um, now it's just gone. And I
Yeah.
guess if you're going to mark like when did the pandemic start? People are like March 13th, 2020. When did the pandemic end? Well, one of the days you're going to pick is May 13th, 2021, right? I mean, this is
Yeah.
however you pick dates on this kind of thing. And I guess we find out this. Oh, now Kim is telling me masks are still mandated in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So now the cities are going to have a different mask mandate than the states. So it's
Yeah. That's where it's
wow.
going to get really confusing, where individual cities have mask mandates still in place, or individual businesses still say you have to wear a mask when you're in here. And then you're going to get inevitably the folks who never wore masks pretending to be vaccinated and
And
saying
yelling,
that
trust the
I don't
science.
I don't need a mask.
Yeah, I know. It's I I think what we've recognized is that no part of our society, not the National Institute of Health, not the Centers for Disease Control, not a presidential administration, not our mayor's shops, not our pastors and churches, not our rabbis and imams and other faith communities, not our business leaders, not our sports organizers and coaches. None of us are prepared to move our society forward when we're faced with a global pandemic.
Yeah.
Like, we did the best we could. It was clunky and awkward and hard to get to. And I guess if you say, well, how's this pandemic going to end? It's like this, that all of a sudden on a Thursday afternoon, okay, you don't have to wear masks
Mission
anymore.
accomplished.
Mission accomplished. To whatever degree, I guess we say that mask wearing is the indicator. Now, the CDC is saying the pandemic is not over. The risk is still out there. We're just saying
Certainly
behavior
globally,
of,
yeah.
yeah. But in the same way that someone will say the pandemic really started in December of 2019, people are like, yeah, my lived experience is it was March of 2020. I feel like whenever the WHO says we're no longer declaring this as a pandemic, that's going to be a very important date, and all the work needs to keep going. But boy, if a country like the United States can hear from the agency into which we grant the most authority about these things, says, take your masks off if you're twice vaccinated, which every time I say twice vaccinated, in my mind, I hear twice baked potatoes. And then I think, I love those things. Those are great.
So
So if you're
delicious.
twice baked potatoed, you get to take your mask off. Our governor in Minnesota was trying to use that as a carrot to get people to get vaccinated. They said, if we get to 70%, it was like a fundraiser.
Right. You could see the little
I'll shave my head.
thermometer.
Yeah. We get 70% of people to donate. I'll shave my head. If you get to 70% vaccinated, we will lift the mandates for the mask. And then
Have we thought about dunk tanks as a incentive to get?
I mean, all the organizations to the point that we don't know how to do this to lead our country and our work and be engaged in the world through a global pandemic. All the states that came up with a way to incentivize people, they were giving away beer in some places. I think in New Jersey, it was a beer and a shot or something. They were giving you $100 certificate, a bond or something in West Virginia. They're putting money into an investment account for you. In Ohio, I heard yesterday that if you got your vaccinations, you were entered into a lottery. And the lottery winner is going to win $1 million. So you had a chance for $1 million win if you got vaccinated. All of this to sort of propel people.
Yeah.
And now maybe the CDC is saying, look, let's just follow what we know with the science, see if that'll motivate people. If you've been vaccinated, take your masks off. Will that motivate people who haven't been vaccinated to finally get vaccinated? I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by this notion.
I think, of course, the trick for music festivals or large venues or large gatherings, how do you quickly tell if someone's been twice vaccinated and can safely remove their mask, or if they're just saying that so they don't have to wear a mask because they never did wear a mask? And so I've seen a lot of talk about, like, how do we signal to the rest of the world, no, I'm vaccinated, you don't have to worry about me. And some of it is like, well, just keep wearing a mask just to show that you're on the team that cares about others, which I thought was rather interesting and almost counterproductive. But
yeah,
so it's almost like the mask continues to be the symbol of, no, I'm on the science team,
Yeah, right. That and maybe it's because it's just going to take all of us a few days to catch up, because again, this came without any warning. It wasn't even like they said something like, the Facebook Oversight Committee that said, hey, on Monday we'll let you know what we've decided, and on the next episode of The Bachelor we will reveal. The CDC didn't. I mean, and apparently in a sign that the Biden administration was not leaning on the CDC, they quickly narrated the story that they didn't know. And they're in a meeting and the word came and they took their masks off in the meeting. I think Biden literally like somebody came in and, whispered, you don't have to wear a mask anymore if you've been twice vaccinated. And they took them off in the meeting, and then Joe Biden walked out and did an address in the Rose Garden and didn't do his dramatic reveal of removing the mask and then hanging it over his ear and then folding it up in his pocket and making it. So, the other day I mentioned here on this podcast, will there be a day when we get back to sort of a kind of retro period where people like have a mask because it's a flashback to a stage in a period? So we can now say that, May 13th, 2021 is the date by which you would be referencing back to when the masks were necessary. Yeah. But I guess when the CDC comes out and says, if you have not been vaccinated once, twice, I don't know, 3 times a lover, whatever, if you haven't been vaccinated, you still don't have to wear a mask. Maybe that's the end of the mask mandate.
Hmm.
Maybe that's when the CDC would be saying, no, don't, just like it's been taken care of. Like at some point, back in the 1920s, tuberculosis was a real problem. Like there were tuberculosis centers, and still in cities that were around back then, they'll have tuberculosis center buildings that are still around now, have been turned into other things, or that's a part of our history. Like if you got tuberculosis, you were so communicable with that disease. They're like, you even go into your house, which that back in the 20s, people lived so close to one another and so many people in one dwelling. They couldn't, that they built facilities and people moved into them. So at some point, that massive fear of public health moved people into those centers. At some point, those stopped, right? And we look back on them and talk about them the way I am now. So we do reach a point at which it'll be less like the polio vaccine that people still, I guess they still get it. I guess kids stuff still get the polio vaccine, but at some point it's just sort of out of the public consciousness. And May 13th is going to be that day. So I can see people already in the chat who are talking about this.
Well, this is confusing, says Rebecca.
Yeah. Masks are still mandatory in Washington. Stephanie says. Stephanie also says it's a bad decision for the president, on the president's part, and the CDC's to drop the mask mandate. Stephanie, I'm interested in why, what your thoughts are there. I will just say, it's my understanding it's not the president's decision to have a mask mandate. They have said, we are going to follow whatever the recommend. And the fact there wasn't a mask mandate federally, even under Biden, there was a strong encouragement. And even with the CDC, there was never a mandate. There was a recommendation, all of which we all talk about colloquially. And I certainly do here as a mask mandate. But, so the CDC are the people, and that the new director of the CDC, I see her in little news clips all the time. She always on the news, I see her with she always has that like virtual background behind her, which kind of makes her pop out and look curious on the screen. So and I think people's use of those virtual backgrounds kind of creates a hidden cloaky kind of feel. Like my background, by the way, here, this is very real. There's no green screen. This is all analog back here. These are atoms. These are not bits and bytes. When people use those fake backgrounds or those virtual backgrounds, I always wonder, what's really behind you, and I think the CDC person, you like, show us what's behind you. You're doing it from home, just be like everybody else. But anyway, so she came out and said, hey, we have decided, and her phrasing was interesting. We don't have the audio or video for this, but she said something to the fact of, if you've been vaccinated fully, you can stop not doing the things that you stopped doing, or that you're not doing, before all this. Like, there's sort of some double negative in there. Like, not you can do everything, but anything you stopped doing because of this, don't worry, but you don't have to stop doing those things anymore. Have at it. Really a big deal.
Yeah.
And it's going to raise a whole conversation about where are we now on the science and what can be trusted. And this switch, this little switcheroo. Okay, can I give an illustration of this that I think's going to be, might be instructive? A lot of times in the work that we do around Vote Common Good, we talk about with people for whom voting, their voting choices are driven by abortion and what they feel about abortion. Many of these people would say, I don't want to vote for a candidate who's going to support a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. And by the issue of guns and Second Amendment gun rights. And when you talk to people who are conservative and they talk about guns, they talk about my right to carry a gun, to bear arms from the Second Amendment. People on the other side of that argument say, it's not about your right, it's about the morality. People are being killed at a high level. Don't tell me about your right, it's about what's good. Then you get to the issue of abortion, and the two political opinions switch sides. Mm-hmm. Now, the conservatives are talking about the morality of abortion, and the progressives, liberals, are talking about the right of a woman to choose. So we know in our society that we move between rights and the moral call, and even on issues that are very important to us, we will come at those issues from different angles depending on the issue. And it's one of the ways that I try to help people who are feel conflicted about these issues to recognize their own bias. So you might say, well, when you talk about guns, you talk about your rights, but an abortion, you talk about the morality. And then you say to other people, when you talk about a woman's right to choose, you talk about her rights. And when you talk about guns, you talk about the morality. So recognize that the other person is coming at this from the other perspective. I think that's, as we mentioned here, that's about to happen in this time. People who
Yeah.
are who felt like the right thing to do and their science were in alignment. And now when those slide out of alignment, now they have a choice to make. And it was easier when it felt like picking one went with the other. But I know a lot of people who are still very concerned about them contracting this disease or spreading it, or the messaging that they're giving, like you said. And it's going to be curious.
Yeah.
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 All right.
Tiffany
Well,
says we haven't been able to enforce mask use since April 5th. I work in a museum. Even though we are vaccinated, worry about people coming from other states. Yeah, it's almost like we haven't had great luck enforcing masks. You know, it seems like every day there's someone in the news throwing a fit in a Walmart because they've been asked to wear a mask, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's almost like the CDC has just thrown its hands up and been like, you know what? Enough of us are vaccinated. We're not going to keep fighting with the people that are never going to wear a mask.
You know, and this is one of the things we know in our society, and I think it's true in other societies as well, is that it's the willingness of the people to be governed that the governing authorities draw their power, right? So you just know that any authority, any government or policing authority, it only has its authority if the people say, we're gonna give in to you. Now, you can continue to raise the use of force and the threat to those people, but ultimately, you're not going to kill them all or something, right? Like you would step. So in a giant protest, only if the people believe or choose to follow what the police or some authority tells them to do, to go home because it's curfew or to not walk down this street. Only you saw that in the Trump supported and Republican denied insurrection that happened.
Mm-hmm.
They just physically overwhelmed. There have been that many people standing outside the Capitol building many times, and with the barricades and the people, and they said, you can't come here. The only reason the people didn't go there is because they said, we're going to honor the fact that you told us not to go there. It's the willingness of the governed to be governed. And anybody who's in any leadership always knows you're negotiating out all of your power comes from these people. Now, in some dictatorships, that is more aggressively applied, but most certainly in this country. And I think there was a recognition, not only where the science was, but because where the science was, people were starting to say, we need to get moving on this. And once they lifted it for outdoor use, I guess we could have seen it coming. When it was going to come for indoor use. And I kind of like that it didn't fall right in line with the Biden administration saying, you know, by July 1st, for the 4th of July, you're going to be freed up, that it was on its own time schedule. But I don't know, maybe other people do, how the CDC made this decision. I don't even know if they've told people how they've made this decision, what all went into it. They just basically said, you know, it has now been decided. You know, I'm not trying to make light of it, and I don't think they were doing this, but it does sort of remind me of when our children were of the age where we could ground them, and we would ground. You know, we would sit in the room or ground them for a number of days. We would often have to renegotiate the amount of time, right? And I would say to our kids, especially when
you
they're
are
like
grounded for 2 weeks, young man.
Yeah, I totally. And I finally got to the point where I would say to our kid, we had four children that were all within a year of one another. So we, like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. Like they were a pack. There were only two of us, and they were a pack. So there'd be times where, you have to put some grounding discipline or something on one of them. And they would say, well, especially one of our sons would very much want to know what the consequence was going to be for whatever it was that we were given. And he'd say, well, how long am I grounded? And I would have to say to him, I don't know. I don't have a manual that I go to with a chart that says, when you do this, then I go across and say, I got to figure this out right now, because I was realizing whatever my initial response, even if I was thoughtful, and it wasn't taking all the things into consideration. So I'd have to come back and say, okay, we said it was going to be, a week without this, or we said it was going to be an hour in your room, or we said it was going to be no friends for this period of time. But let's now adjust. You felt like that was kind of baked in once we said, I don't know, we're figuring this out. And you've put me in a tough spot. I didn't wake up today deciding like, what's my plan for, grounding you. This came as a bit of a surprise, whatever it was that you did. I feel a little bit like that's what we've recognized in our society as a whole with this pandemic. Like, we don't know. Everyone's trying to figure it out
up as we go. Yeah.
And we're all saying, as we did maybe when we were grounded by our parents, well, how long? And the poor people having to make this decision, we're like, I don't know. It depends. And we don't even know what it depends on, but it depends on a lot of things. And we don't know what they are. And now, I don't know, we've reached that, we've reached that point. All right. Can we introduce you to Kizzy Corbett? Kizzy is someone that this story came out actually in December and then again in January. And I saw a note about it the other day, and it reminded me that I didn't look back. And I'm now remembering that back in December, there was still a lot of angst in the air for me. And then in January, I wasn't paying attention to hardly anything but the violent Trump-led insurrection and Republican supported and now denied attempted takeover of our government. So I didn't watch this bit back then, but I was reminded of it, that the person who is credited in great part, her team, but really her work, credited with getting this mRNA vaccine that we talked about last week on this Friday version of the podcast. There's a person behind it. So when people say like, who are the scientists made this, we don't know who they are. Well, no, there's actually people, and this person's name is her full name is Kizmika, or full first name Kizzy Corbett. She goes by Kizzy, and she has 101,000 followers on Instagram, by the way, and she's not what you think about if you're someone like me and you think about what a viral immunologist does, who's going to, create vaccines in some lab somewhere. She's young, she's black, she's hip, she's great. She's a fabulous science spokesperson. So as a lot of people have been saying, and 101,000 people have known already, she's someone to pay attention to. But as I've been asking around the last couple of days to people like, hey, did you know that the mRNA vaccine, is really credited to a 34-year-old black woman? No one I've talked to has said, oh yeah, no, I knew that. Yeah, her name's, Kizzy Corbett. She's named popular. So I'm just not hanging around her Instagram followers, apparently. And so I want to show this to people so they can see this. This is a little 5-minute bit from CBS. They did a whole thing on her back in January, and it's really wonderful. And I think it's worth our conversation and the kind of thing that we want to turn your attention to. So here's this little bit from CBS.
Public health officials are concerned about millions of Americans who are resistant to taking the vaccine. To address that, some of those officials are shining a light not just on the science behind the shots, but on the scientists who help bring the vaccines to fruition. When the president paid a visit to the National Institutes of Health last March, the leads at the Vaccine Research Center explained their life-saving mission.
Y-shaped proteins that will bind.
The key to it, a 34-year-old doctor named Kizzy Corbett.
I was just there telling the task force about the work that we've been doing.
2 weeks later, Dr. Corbett's team began the first stage of clinical trials.
We have taken a lot of the knowledge that we have gained over the last 6 years and applied it to a fairly revolutionary vaccine platform in collaboration with Moderna.
That vaccine rolled out within 10 months.
The vaccine teaches the body how to fend off a virus because it teaches the body how to look for the virus. By basically just showing the body the spike protein of the virus, the body then says, oh, we've seen this protein before. Let's go fight against it. That's how it works.
For a lot of people, seeing you as the person who is part of this process, there's a trust factor.
To be honest, I didn't realize the level of impact that my visibility might have. I do my work because I love my work.
Dr. Corbett's interest in science began at an early age, but one opportunity made a key difference. She attended the University of Maryland, Baltimore County as a Meyerhoff Scholar, an aggressive program that mentors minorities and women in science. Graduates include Surgeon General Jerome Adams.
Was she someone who's going to make it all along?
She was definitely going to make it in life.
Dr. Freeman Rabowski has been president there for nearly 30 years.
She had strong science background, but she also was very comfortable with people. We need more scientists who can connect to people. She could do that when she was 17 easily. What we do at UMBC is to support students of color, black, but also students in general, to make sure they make it in science.
Only 18% of all students graduate with a STEM degree, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. Around 2% are black.
It's important for those people to see people looking like them, like themselves, who can be involved. If it's about women or if it's about blacks, because it shows that you've got people who understand what you've gone through.
Dr. Corbett and I have worked together for maybe 15 or 16 years, since she was in high school.
Dr. Barney Graham's not only Corbett's mentor, he's her boss.
When you recognize somebody has special qualities, you need to do things that can keep those other things out of the way and avoid some of the dismissiveness that often happens, not only to minority people, but to women.
And historically, that bias strikes not just professionals in the field, but those that they serve.
Well, let's talk about the impediments to the trust.
I grew up in Birmingham. All of my life, I was hearing about the Tuskegee study.
The federally sanctioned Tuskegee experiment sought to examine the long-term effects of syphilis by letting infected black men go untreated with no regard to the suffering it caused.
How do you feel about being used as a guinea pig?
Well, I thought once he was pretty rough.
Another example, the special cells of Baltimore cancer patient Henrietta Lacks were taken without her explicit permission and were subsequently used in billions of dollars worth of medical research without compensation.
There are many other examples of supposedly objective scientists who were caring about everyone, who valued people of color less. It's a painful truth. And this is what's significant. When I say Kizzy Corbett is from a small town in North Carolina, a young woman of faith who understands the socio-cultural issues that we face, who knows what racism means, she gets all of that.
What's your message to people who are hesitant to take this vaccine?
Number one is that I get it. Number two is that to really take advantage of the level of transparency that we are attempting, even I haven't even seen before, such as FDA hearings and briefings being broadcast online and data coming out almost instantly.
And to try and address them.
And in one of those webinars,
fully,
Dr. Anthony Fauci gave her a ton of credit.
The vaccine that you're going to be taking was developed by an African-American woman. And that is just a fact. I mean, that is a fact.
A fact offering illumination to those often left in the dark.
She cannot be a hidden figure. She cannot be a hidden figure. She needs to be in textbooks. Little girls need to see her of all races. This is what's possible.
I mean, seriously, isn't that great?
That's really
Kizzy
great.
Corbett. I just think, man, so much about that is fantastic. the whole backstory. What obviously she's become a famous person, but we're gonna do everything we can to have a conversation with Kizzy PhD, which is her Instagram and Twitter handle, which is also sort of awesome, right? Like she takes Kizzy for her nickname and then wraps it into a PhD.
Yeah.
She's fun and not kidding around. She's sort of both of those. She's the full package. And I think it's just a wonderful story of who are the people behind this, especially because for all the vaccine hesitant people and say, there's something nefarious going on or it's big profits and everything else that's driving this. You see just in that little story, they were working on the technology that brought us the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine for more than 6 years. So it is a new technique, yes, but they've been actually saying we can move vaccines to this way of operating. They've been doing that for a while. She's been doing that most of her professional career. And so she is a fully immersed professional in that area. And I just thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we should celebrate those stories. Absolutely. I think it does do a good job, that piece of bringing up the vaccine hesitancy of the Black community and how justified that is. I feel like for white folks that were just like, I don't know, I don't want to get the vaccine. There's a good reason for the Black community to be skeptical because they've had this history of being treated poorly by the scientific community and being treated as guinea pigs, like that one reporter said. And so I think it's so powerful to see a doctor like Dr. Corbett being the one to bring this vaccine to the public, and hopefully that helps get more people vaccinated and keep communities safe. And that's really great.
Yeah, and if you're going to put a face on this for the public, it's great that the truthful face can be a young woman scientist and Black woman scientist. Like that is not because you're sort of hunting around in some old story of affirmative action and you need to sort of conjure up a story that's not. It's because she's actually the one who's been working on this and has been in that whole program they talked about from the University of Maryland that for 2 decades has been working on making sure that certain people who'd be vulnerable to not being in the sciences and not being in the public service are recruited in, are maintained in the program, are seen as successful. And she's a unique individual, clearly. I mean, she was a star when she was 17. Like she was picked up by the Dr. Grams, who's been her boss and mentor now at the NIH. He saw when she was 17 that there was something unique about her as a potential scientist. And so it's really wonderful, I think, to see. This is how people often talk about athletes, right? Some star athlete goes into a college and there's a coach that sort of takes notice and picks them up and then ushers them all the way into their professional career. And you see this happening in those worlds. You see it happening sometimes in the music industry and world where someone picks out someone, or even in acting, like a lot of our entertainment world. To know that that's happening in the sciences, it's also pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then for the fact that the thing she happened to be working on, she could have lived in total obscurity, right? That maybe as a viral immunologist, she was never going to be someone who was going to serve the public in such a profoundly specific way that it would be, gradual accomplishments over time. That the global pandemic is responded to by the very thing that she's working on. And I would love to know more about her story, because very often these people at the spearhead of these kinds of movements, they're making decisions that had it not been those decisions, we wouldn't have gotten here. Mm-hmm. Like it may not have been inevitable. It might not be that there's just an arc to success or an arc to the universe that's going to lead us to goodness. We may have to be people that are shaping that arc by the decisions we're making.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, was there something unique about her background? Was there something unique about her own experience that led to this? I bet there's a lot more to this, and I'm sure there's a screenplay already sold to a movie company, and I sure hope that for the next 50 years, Kizzy Corbett is talked about in the way that Madame Curie and Helen Keller and other famous science and innovators in those areas have been.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I got to say, Doug, she's 34 and she's a doctor and she saved the world. It makes me kind of question what I've done with my life thus far. It's
you may not want to measure yourself against every.
I'm pushing 38 last I checked, and
well, but is she happy? You can say that. Is she happy with herself? She seemed pretty happy.
She seems pretty happy.
Is she does she get enough exercise? Yeah, she seems like she's healthy. Okay, she wins on all of them.
She wins.
Get yourself off the Kizzy scale is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Don't all of us. Yeah. Maybe she peaked early, right? She's one of those. What's she going to do after this? You think people are still going to be impressed 50 years from now that she saved the planet from a pandemic? Yeah, probably. Well, so that's a little bit of good news today. Thanks for being a part of our Science Day. We'd love to have had Kizzy PhD, Kizzy Corbett on with us. But if you're thinking, I'm so glad that we're able to move forward and take my mask off, thank Kizzy PhD. And I don't know, follow her on the social places if that's the thing you do. Speaking of social places, follow us on the social places. If you're watching this we put this out on multiple streams and multiple partner organizations. So if you've never actually been over to Vote Common Good, head over there, votecommongood.com, and you can find out that we're doing a lot of things, including turning our attention to immigration and the stories of migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and others. We're going to do that by making a ride across the country from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, and hosting community rides all around the country. See, Dan, I'm working on a little spiel for this. A ride across the country and rides all around the country. Trying to get something, because when we describe this to people, we want them to know that they can host a ride in their own community. Say you're in Washington, D.C., and you want to invite Kizzy Corbett, the famous scientist and world saver, to join you. Put together a ride and ask her to come out and ride along with you. If you're in Tacoma, Washington, if you're in St. Louis, Missouri, if you're in Nantucket, wherever you are, I don't know where Nantucket is, or I would have said the state, but if you're in Nantucket, put together a ride and invite people to raise awareness. We're asking you to do that between September 10th and November 14th. There's 9 weekends in there. Pick one of those weekends and make it a part of your fall engagement to raise awareness. All the details are at wethepeopleride.org, or you can get all of it over at votecommongood.com, and you'll see it all there. Or if you want to ride with us for a day, for a week along the coast, I'm telling you, Dan, we're going to talk about this more on Monday, but we've got some partners and some activities planned on this route that are going to be so great. Like when we are in Arizona and New Mexico and Texas between September 24th and October 31st, October 3rd, September 24th, October 3rd. It's going to be just, we're going to do events on both sides of the borders. It's just going to be fantastic. So if you're someone who said, look, I want to come along, but I can't go for 65 days, come for 3 days, come for 5 days, come for a week. Don't book your return ticket, because you might get the bug and want to stay with us for a little bit longer. Or tell us at the beginning how long you can come. But we'd love for you to consider this, spend a little time thinking about it, and then we'll see you down the road. And we will also see you tomorrow. No, we won't see you tomorrow. Well, maybe, who knows? Maybe we'll pop up podcast tomorrow, because it's Friday. We will see you on Monday, right back here, wherever it is you're looking at or listening to all of this. So thanks for being with us today.